According to the local tradition, the settlers who established the town of Blanket, 2 miles east, about 1870, named it for Native American blanket they found on the banks of the nearby creek. The earliest marked grave in this cemetery, which served the rural community of Blanket, is that of Lupirda Cox, who died in 1876. The cemetery contains many of the era's earliest settlers and their descendants, including several teachers of the former Eureka School, which was located just across the road from the site, and the cemetery remains active and continues to serve the area. Very cool. Let's get a closer look.
Blanket is a small town in the heart of Texas with a population of about 300 people. You'll find us on U.S. Highway 37377, 10 miles northeast of Brownwood in eastern Brown County. Legend tells us that our name dates back to 1852, when surveyors crossed paths with Tokenawa Indians waiting out a storm while hunting buffalo. The Indians had spread their blankets over the bushes along the bank of the creek to dry, hence the name Blanket. Eventually, in 1873, the Pinckney Anderson General Store opened and became home to the post office in 1875. In 1891, Fort Worth and Rio Grande Railroad extended its tracks from Comanche to Brownwood, and the Blanket population moved from the creek banks towards the rails. During the late 1920s cotton era, 3 gins operated here, and the population peaked at 472. During the Great Depression, the population dropped to about 300 and has remained stable ever since. The cemetery was surveyed in March 1972 by Ayla Ball and Hazel Witzel. Additional information was gathered from Mrs. Edna Carroll McLinnis funeral record homes and newspaper clippings. This record was updated in the spring of 1994 by Mr. and Mrs. David F. Stewart, and again January 16, 1999 by Harlan V. Wells. Maintenance of the cemetery was somewhat limited until sometime in the 1980s when Floyd Eoffs started a much-needed cleanup on it. Around 1987, Mr. and Mrs. Eoff became unable to do the maintenance. David and Etza Stewart began an energetic campaign to thoroughly clean up and revitalize the cemetery. They have, with the aid of the Blanket Lions Club, Brown County Precinct 3, and a few friends and relatives, cleaned out all the underbrush, briars, weeds, tall grass, and unsightly trees that have obscured the beauty and hidden the access to the graves of this cemetery for years. In addition to the cleanup, they have filled the sunken graves, spread gravel, sown grass seed, redistributed existing iris plants, built fences, cleaned gravestones, straightened tilted headstones, and even installed small flower holders at the head of each grave, in which they regularly replace flowers. Several of the graves had fieldstone markers only, so they have built and installed markers for those that can be identified. The cemetery was poorly identified, so Mr. and Mrs. Stewart built and installed a large sign identifying it as Eureka Cemetery. This commendable effort, a labor of love, has been made by Mr. and Mrs. Stewart at considerable personal expense as a retirement project. Justly proud of their restoration accomplishment, Mr. and Mrs. Stewart applied for the Texas Historical Commission for recognition of the Eureka Cemetery as an official Texas historical site in 1994. That application was granted, and on the 2nd of December 1995, the Brown County Historical Society held a dedication ceremony, and the marker was proudly installed. What a tribute it would be to our ancestors who helped build this great nation if more people would follow Mr. and Mrs. David Stewart's example and restore thousands of sadly neglected cemeteries where they nest. The importance of cemeteries. Cemeteries are among the most valuable of historic resources. They are reminders of various settlement partners, such as villages, rural communities, urban centers, and ghost towns. Cemeteries can reveal information about historic events, religions, lifestyles, and genealogy. Names on grave markers serve as a directory of early residents and reflect the ethnic diversity and unique population of an area. Cultural influence in grave marker design, cemetery decoration, and landscaping contribute to a complete narrative of Texas history. Established in large part for the benefit of the living, cemeteries perpetuate the memories of the deceased, giving a place for character and definition. Unfortunately, historic cemeteries do not necessarily remain permanent reminders of our heritage. Across Texas, they are threatened by development and expanding urban areas, natural forces such as weathering and uncontrolled vegetation, lack of fences to keep cattle from toppling headstones, and vandalism and theft, including removal of headstones and objects. Neglect accelerates the compounds of this process. If not recorded and cared for, these reminders of early settlements could forever be lost. The Texas Historical Commission is a state agency whose mission it is to protect and preserve the state's prehistoric and historic resources for use, education, enjoyment, and economic benefit of the present and future generations. One of its many programs is the identification and designation of historic cemeteries. The Historic Texas Cemetery Designation Program is designed to recognize family and community graveyards. The program does not restrict the use of the cemetery or adjacent property. Anyone can apply for a designation by completing the application. The application is a comprehensive process documenting the cemetery, its history, and current status. The Texas Historical Commission offers webinars to explain the process. The Texas Historical Commission has a searchable atlas of historic sites, which includes cemeteries, buildings, courthouses, historical markers, museums, and national registered properties. The atlas is searchable by Texas County. The Texas Historical Commission has listed more than 2,200 Texas cemeteries with Historic Texas Cemetery designation in its online atlas. The atlas includes brief description and a map of the location and cemetery. The Texas Historical Cemetery, THC, designation and the historical marker are separate programs. At present, there are 2,476 cemeteries with descriptive historical markers. 95 cemeteries in Dallas County have historical markers, and 33 have THC designation only. 21 have both THC designation and a historic marker. What is the difference? The historical marker program was the original way to identify many types of historical landmarks. It is the older program and more difficult to obtain. The THC program was started in 1998 to identify the historic value of family and community graveyards. In order to obtain a historical marker for a cemetery, Texas Historical Commission now requires obtaining the Texas Historic Cemetery designation first. The application fee is $100. It's sad to think that most family members don't even know these people are here. Today, we don't pass down family history or traditions. We just move away and throw away. With that being said, if you don't know they're there, you have no reason to go. The locals could and should maintain this cemetery and its dignity. This series aims to bring awareness to cemeteries and the importance of maintaining them as the years pass. Many cemeteries, if not all, are historical, though very few are registered as such. If it weren't for the Eoff and Stewart families' efforts to preserve this site, we may not have ever known of its historical significance. Thank you.